Your Honor, I don't need a lawyer to tell the truth. Those words still echo in my mind every time I think about that day. The day I walked into that courtroom with nothing but my dignity and the clothes on my back. The day I thought my life was over. The day I learned that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest. You know, they say karma has a way of evening things out. That justice finds a way, even when the deck is stacked against you. That strength comes from the most unexpected places. I used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better about an unfair world. But I was wrong. Hey everyone, hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. Whether you're dealing with some cold weather or enjoying the sunshine, I hope this story finds you in a good place. Because what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and fighting for what's right. My name is Samuel Washington. I'm 62 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been a commercial cleaner in downtown Chicago. Not the most glamorous job, but it's honest work. It pays the bills, keeps food on the table, and lets me sleep with a clear conscience every night. This is the story of how I went from being a broken man standing alone in a courtroom, facing prison time for a crime I didn't commit, to watching my two estranged sons walk through those doors in $1,000 suits, ready to fight for me in ways I never imagined possible. But before I tell you about that moment that changed everything, before I tell you about the conspiracy that nearly destroyed my life, and before I tell you about the family reunion that 15 years in the making, let me ask you to hit that like button if you believe in second chances, subscribe if you think family bonds can survive anything, and share this if you've ever felt completely alone in your darkest hour. But let me start from the beginning, because the truth is, none of this would have happened if I hadn't made the biggest mistake of my life 20 years ago. I was 42 when everything fell apart the first time. Back then, I wasn't a cleaner. I was Samuel Washington, small business owner. I had a little construction company, nothing fancy, but we did good work. Honest work. I had 12 employees, a decent reputation, and 2 sons I was proud of. Alan was 22, fresh out of law school, full of fire and ambition. He wanted to change the world, fight for justice, make his old man proud. David was 19, just starting college, but already showing the same drive, the same hunger for success that I recognized in myself at that age. I thought I was building something for them. A legacy. A foundation they could build on. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The mistake I made wasn't stealing money or cheating clients or cutting corners on safety. The mistake I made was trusting the wrong person. My business partner, Robert Parker, had been my friend since high school. We'd started the company together, built it from nothing. When he came to me with an opportunity to bid on a major city contract, I didn't ask enough questions. I should have known something was wrong when the bid required a $50,000 upfront payment for materials. I should have been suspicious when Robert insisted we use his cousin's supply company. I should have read every line of every document before I signed. But I trusted him. And that trust cost me everything. The materials never came. The cousin's company didn't exist. The city contract was real, but our bid was disqualified because we couldn't deliver. And somehow, all the financial liability fell on me. Robert had structured everything so that when it collapsed, I was left holding the debt. $50,000 might not sound like much to some people, but to a small construction company in 2004, it was everything. I lost the business. I lost the house. I lost my reputation in the industry. But the worst part, the part that still keeps me awake some nights, was watching my sons' faces when I had to tell them I couldn't pay for their education anymore. Alan had to drop out of his master's program. David had to leave college entirely. They didn't say much that day. Just packed their things and left. Alan got a job at a law firm, working his way up from the bottom. David enlisted in the military. They both made it clear they didn't want my help, didn't want my apologies, and didn't want me in their lives. I haven't spoken to either of them in 15 years. So when I tell you I walked into that courtroom alone, I mean completely alone. No family, no friends, no support system. Just me, a 62-year-old black man in a cheap suit, facing a theft charge that could send me to prison for 5 years. The accusation came from Mrs. Victoria Hartwell, one of my regular clients. I'd been cleaning her downtown law office every Tuesday and Friday for 3 years. Never had a problem, never had a complaint. She always paid on time, always treated me with basic respect. Until the day her husband's Rolex went missing. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I was finishing up the conference room when Mrs. Hartwell stormed in, her face red with anger. "Where is it?" she demanded. I looked up from wiping down the table. "Where's what, ma'am? Don't play dumb with me." "My husband's watch. The Rolex he left on his desk yesterday. It's worth $30,000, and now it's gone." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Hartwell, I haven't seen any watch. I cleaned Mr. Hartwell's office yesterday, but there was nothing on his desk except papers." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact second when she made up her mind about what had happened. "You were the only person in that office. The only person with access. I'm calling the police." I tried to explain. Tried to remind her that I'd been cleaning for her for 3 years without incident. Tried to point out that other people had access to the building. But she'd already decided I was guilty. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched my cleaning cart, my car, even asked me to empty my pockets right there in the lobby. Of course, they found nothing, because I hadn't taken anything. But Mrs. Hartwell was insistent. She filed charges. And somehow, in a system that's supposed to presume innocence, I found myself having to prove I wasn't a thief. The preliminary hearing was a nightmare. Mrs. Hartwell testified that the watch had definitely been on her husband's desk when she left the office Monday evening. She testified that I was the only person who could have taken it. She testified that she'd always had a feeling about me, whatever that meant. My court-appointed attorney was a kid fresh out of law school who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He asked a few basic questions, made a few weak objections, and basically went through the motions. When the judge set a trial date, I knew I was in trouble. I couldn't afford a real lawyer. The public defender's office was overloaded and understaffed. I was going to have to represent myself, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. The weeks leading up to the trial were the longest of my life. Word spread through the building where I worked. Some clients canceled their contracts. Others started watching me like a hawk, counting their office supplies after I left. I kept working, kept my head down, kept telling myself that the truth would come out. That justice would prevail. That somehow, everything would work out. I was naive. The night before the trial, I sat in my small apartment, practicing what I would say to the judge. How I would explain that I'd never stolen anything in my life. How I would make them understand that I needed this job, that I couldn't risk everything for a watch, no matter how expensive. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to matter. Mrs. Hartwell was a wealthy white woman with connections and credibility. I was a black janitor with a criminal charge hanging over my head. In the eyes of the system, we weren't equals. I thought about calling Alan and David. I'd kept track of them over the years, even though they'd made it clear they didn't want contact. I knew Alan had become a successful attorney. I knew David had gone to law school after his military service and was working at a big firm. But I couldn't bring myself to dial their numbers. What right did I have to ask for their help after I'd failed them so completely? What right did I have to drag them into my mess? So I went to bed that night knowing I would face the trial alone. The morning of the trial, I put on my best suit, the same one I'd worn to job interviews 15 years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see strength instead of defeat. I tried to see a man worth fighting for. I walked into that courthouse with my head high, even though my hands were shaking. I took my seat at the defendant's table, alone, while Mrs. Hartwell sat with her high-powered attorney and her husband. The prosecutor was confident, almost smug. He laid out the case like it was already decided. Opportunity, access, motive. A poor man, a valuable item, a crime of convenience. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I don't need a lawyer to tell the truth. But as I started to explain my side of the story, as I watched the skeptical faces in the courtroom, as I felt the weight of everyone's assumptions pressing down on me, I realized that sometimes the truth isn't enough. Sometimes you need more than honesty to fight a system that's already made up its mind about who you are. I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. But I was also about to discover that family bonds, even broken ones, can be stronger than pride, stronger than hurt, and stronger than 15 years of silence. Because just when I thought I was completely alone in the world, just when the judge was about to make a decision that would destroy what was left of my life, those courtroom doors were about to swing open. And everything I thought I knew about my sons, about forgiveness, and about fighting for justice was about to change forever. The judge was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, Judge Patricia Morrison. She'd been listening to the prosecutor's opening statement with the kind of expression that told me she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. Poor man, rich victim, missing valuable item. Case closed. Mr. Washington, she said, looking down at me over her reading glasses, you've chosen to represent yourself in this matter. Do you understand the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor. Theft of property valued at over $25,000. And you understand that if convicted, you could face up to 5 years in prison? My mouth went dry. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed man named District Attorney Williams, stood up with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case like this. He was probably in his 40s, the kind of guy who drove a BMW and lived in the suburbs and saw people like me as statistics rather than human beings. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of theft by opportunity. The defendant had exclusive access to the victim's office during the time period when the watch disappeared. He had motive, he had means, and he had opportunity. I wanted to object, to point out that I didn't have exclusive access, that other people worked in that building, that I'd never shown any signs of being a thief. But I didn't know the proper legal language, didn't know when I was allowed to speak. Mrs. Hartwell took the stand first. She was dressed in an expensive navy suit, her gray hair perfectly styled, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. She looked like someone who'd never had to worry about money, never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Mrs. Hartwell, D.A. Williams began, please tell the court about the events of March 15th. I arrived at the office that morning around 9 a.m. I immediately noticed that my husband's Rolex was missing from his desk. It's a 1995 Submariner, worth approximately $30,000. He'd left it there the previous evening. Who had access to your husband's office between Monday evening and Tuesday morning? Only the cleaning staff. Specifically, Mr. Washington. He cleans our offices every Tuesday and Friday. Had you ever had problems with Mr. Washington before? Mrs. Hartwell paused, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. Not exactly problems, but I'd noticed him looking at things. Expensive things. Watches, jewelry, electronics. He seemed very interested in our personal belongings. That was a lie. A complete fabrication. In 3 years of cleaning their office, I'd barely spoken to Mrs. Hartwell beyond basic pleasantries. I'd never shown any interest in their personal items because I was there to do a job, not to case the place. But when I started to stand up to object, Judge Morrison gave me a look that made it clear I should sit down and wait my turn. D.A. Williams continued his questioning, building a picture of me as someone who'd been planning this theft for months. Someone who'd gained their trust only to betray it. Someone who fit every stereotype about poor black men that the system was designed to reinforce. When it was my turn to cross-examine Mrs. Hartwell, I stood up on shaky legs. I'd watched enough legal shows to know I was supposed to ask questions, but I didn't know how to do it effectively. Mrs. Hartwell, I began, you said I was the only person with access to your husband's office. But don't other people work in that building? The building is secure. Only authorized personnel have access after hours. But during the day, when your office is open, other people come and go, right? Clients, delivery people, other employees? Yes, but the watch disappeared overnight. Between Monday evening and Tuesday morning. How do you know it disappeared overnight? Could it have been taken earlier and you just didn't notice? Mrs. Hartwell's attorney objected before she could answer. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Washington, please stick to facts. I tried a different approach. Mrs. Hartwell, in the 3 years I've been cleaning your office, have I ever taken anything before? Not that I'm aware of. Have I ever given you any reason to distrust me? She hesitated. No, not directly. Then why would I suddenly decide to steal an expensive watch and risk my job, my reputation, and my freedom? Objection, D.A. Williams called out. Calls for speculation. Sustained. I was getting frustrated. Every question I asked seemed to be objected to or ruled out of order. I didn't understand the rules of this game, and it was becoming clear that I was going to lose. But I pressed on, asking about security cameras, about other employees, about whether the watch might have been misplaced rather than stolen. Mrs. Hartwell had an answer for everything, and her answers all pointed to me. When she stepped down, I felt like I'd been in a boxing match with someone twice my size. The next witness was building security, a guy named Tom Rodriguez who'd worked there for 8 years. He testified that I'd badged in at 6 p.m. on Monday and badged out at 9:30 p.m. He confirmed that I was the only cleaning person scheduled for that evening. But when I asked him about the security cameras, something interesting happened. Mr. Rodriguez, are there security cameras in the office areas? Yes, sir. Cameras in all the common areas and hallways. What about inside individual offices? No, sir. Privacy concerns. The cameras only cover public spaces. So there's no video footage of what happened inside Mr. Hartwell's office? That's correct. What about the hallway outside his office? Tom shifted uncomfortably. Well, there should be, but what? The camera outside that particular office has been malfunctioning for about 2 weeks. We've been waiting for parts to fix it. I felt a spark of hope. So there's no video evidence of anyone entering or leaving that office during the time period in question? No, sir. D.A. Williams looked annoyed, but he couldn't object to facts. This was the first piece of information that didn't make me look guilty. During my cross-examination of Tom, I learned something else interesting. The building had a cleaning crew that worked during the day, handling common areas and basic maintenance. They had access to all the offices, including Mr. Hartwell's. Mr. Rodriguez, you said I was the only cleaning person scheduled for Monday evening. But what about the day crew? Do they have access to individual offices? Yes, sir. They clean during business hours. So other people besides me had access to Mr. Hartwell's office on Monday? Yes, sir. It wasn't much, but it was something. It established that I wasn't the only person who could have taken the watch. The prosecution's case continued with Mr. Hartwell himself taking the stand. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, the kind of person who commanded respect just by walking into a room. He testified that he'd definitely left the watch on his desk Monday evening, that it was a habit of his, that he was certain it had been there when he left. But when I questioned him, cracks started to appear in his certainty. Mr. Hartwell, you said you always leave your watch on your desk when you're working late. Is that correct? Yes, it's a habit. I take it off when I'm reviewing documents or typing. How often do you work late? 2 or 3 times a week. And you always leave the watch in the same spot? Usually, yes. Have you ever forgotten it somewhere else? Left it in a bathroom, or a conference room, or taken it home without realizing it? He paused. Well, occasionally, but... So it's possible you could have taken it with you Monday night and simply forgotten? I don't think so. But it's possible. I suppose anything's possible, but I'm quite certain I left it on my desk. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it introduced the possibility that the watch had never been stolen at all. That maybe Mr. Hartwell had simply misplaced it. As the morning wore on, I started to feel like maybe I had a chance. The prosecution's case wasn't as airtight as they'd made it seem. There were other people with access, no video evidence, and at least some doubt about whether a theft had even occurred. But then D.A. Williams called his surprise witness. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Janet Morrison to the stand. I didn't recognize the name, but when a middle-aged black woman walked to the witness stand, my heart sank. She was wearing a cleaning company uniform, and I had a terrible feeling about what was coming next. Ms. Morrison, what is your occupation? I'm a supervisor with Elite Cleaning Services. Do you know the defendant, Samuel Washington? Yes, I do. He used to work for our company. This was news to me. I'd never worked for Elite Cleaning Services. I'd been self-employed for the past 15 years, working directly with clients. Can you tell the court about Mr. Washington's employment with your company? He worked for us briefly about 2 years ago. We had to let him go. Why was he terminated? We had reports of missing items from client offices. Small things at first, office supplies, petty cash. But then a client reported a missing tablet computer. I shot to my feet. Your Honor, that's not true. I never worked for that company. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Mr. Washington, you'll have your chance to cross-examine. Please sit down. But I couldn't sit down. This woman was lying under oath, and I didn't understand why. Your Honor, I can prove I never worked for Elite Cleaning Services. I have tax records, client contracts, everything that shows I've been self-employed. Mr. Washington, sit down now, or I'll hold you in contempt. I sat down, but my mind was racing. Someone had paid this woman to lie about me. Someone wanted to make sure I was convicted, and they were willing to commit perjury to do it. Janet Morrison continued her testimony, painting a picture of me as a serial thief who'd been fired for stealing from clients. She claimed to have documentation, personnel files, incident reports. When it was my turn to cross-examine her, I was ready. Ms. Morrison, you said I worked for Elite Cleaning Services 2 years ago. That's correct. What were the exact dates of my employment? I'd have to check the records, but it was sometime in 2022. And you said you have personnel files and incident reports? Yes. Did you bring those files with you today? She looked uncomfortable. No, I didn't think they'd be necessary. Ms. Morrison, I'm going to ask you directly. Have you ever seen me before today? Yes, when you worked for our company. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder I'd brought with me. Inside were copies of my tax returns, business licenses, and client contracts going back 15 years. Your Honor, I'd like to submit these documents as evidence. They clearly show that I've been self-employed as an independent contractor for the past 15 years. I have never worked for Elite Cleaning Services or any other cleaning company. D.A. Williams objected, but Judge Morrison allowed the documents to be entered into evidence. She looked them over carefully, then looked at Janet Morrison with a very different expression. Ms. Morrison, these documents appear to contradict your testimony. Can you explain this discrepancy? Janet Morrison's composure cracked. Maybe I was thinking of someone else. We have a lot of employees. Someone else named Samuel Washington. It's possible. But the damage was done. It was clear that Janet Morrison had lied under oath, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The question was why. During a brief recess, I tried to figure out what was happening. Why would someone pay a witness to lie about me? What did I have that someone wanted? What was I missing? The answer came to me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about a stolen watch. This was about something much bigger. Mrs. Hartwell's law firm handled real estate development. Big projects, city contracts, the kind of deals that involved millions of dollars. And I cleaned their offices twice a week, which meant I had access to documents, conversations, information that could be valuable to the right people. What if I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see? What if someone thought I knew something that could hurt them? What if this whole theft charge was designed to discredit me before I could become a problem? I thought back over the past few months, trying to remember anything unusual I might have witnessed. Late-night meetings, hushed conversations, documents left out on desks. And then I remembered. 3 weeks ago, I'd been cleaning the conference room when I'd overheard Mrs. Hartwell on a phone call. She'd been talking about a city contract, something about low-income housing development. She'd mentioned bribes, payoffs, falsified inspection reports. At the time, I'd tried not to listen. It wasn't my business, and I needed the job. But now I wondered if someone had seen me in that room, wondered if I'd heard something I shouldn't have. When court resumed, I was ready to fight back. But I was also scared. If powerful people were willing to frame me for theft to keep me quiet, what else were they willing to do? As D.A. Williams prepared to call his next witness, I realized that this trial wasn't just about my freedom. It was about justice, truth, and whether one man could stand up against a system designed to crush him. I was about to find out just how alone I really was. But I was also about to discover that sometimes, when you think you're fighting the biggest battle of your life, the cavalry is already on the way. The next witness D.A. Williams called made my blood run cold. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Robert Parker to the stand. I hadn't seen Robert in 15 years, not since the day he destroyed my construction business and disappeared with $50,000 of my money. He looked older now, grayer, but he still had that same confident smile that had fooled me 20 years ago. As he walked to the witness stand, he glanced in my direction. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there that made my stomach drop. Not guilt, not shame, but satisfaction. Like he was enjoying this. Mr. Parker, D.A. Williams began, how do you know the defendant? Samuel and I were business partners about 20 years ago. We ran a small construction company together. Can you tell the court about your business relationship with Mr. Washington? Robert settled back in his chair, looking completely at ease. Well, Samuel was always the hands-on guy, you know. Good with tools, good with workers. But he wasn't great with the business side of things. Numbers, contracts, legal stuff. That was rich, coming from the man who'd used my trust in him to steal everything I'd worked for. Did you have any concerns about Mr. Washington's character during your partnership? Objection, I called out, standing up. Relevance. Judge Morrison looked at D.A. Williams. Counselor. Your Honor, this goes to the defendant's pattern of behavior and character. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the charges. Robert continued. Well, there were some irregularities with company funds. Money that couldn't be accounted for. Samuel handled a lot of the day-to-day financial transactions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was rewriting history, making me the villain in a story where he was the one who'd stolen everything. What happened to your business partnership? Unfortunately, we had to dissolve the company due to financial irregularities. There was a significant amount of money missing, and Samuel was the only one with access to those accounts. Did you report these irregularities to the authorities? No, I didn't. Samuel was my friend, and I hoped he would make things right. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. Every word out of his mouth was a lie, but he was telling it with such conviction that I could see the jury believing him. When it was my turn to cross-examine Robert, I stood up slowly. This was my chance to expose him, to tell the truth about what had really happened 20 years ago. Mr. Parker, you testified that I was responsible for financial irregularities in our company. Is that correct? That's right. And you said I was the only one with access to company accounts? Yes. That's interesting, because I have bank records that show you were also a signatory on all company accounts. In fact, you were the one who set up most of those accounts. Robert's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, technically I had access, but... Mr. Parker, isn't it true that you structured our business partnership so that all financial liability would fall on me in case of default? I don't recall the specific details. You don't recall? Let me refresh your memory. I pulled out a folder I'd brought with me. I have copies of our partnership agreement, loan documents, and incorporation papers. All of them show that you made sure your name wasn't on any of the liability clauses. D.A. Williams objected. Your Honor, these documents haven't been authenticated. Mr. Washington, do you have proof of authenticity for these documents? I felt my heart sink. Your Honor, these are copies of documents I've kept for 20 years, but I don't have the original notarizations or... Then I can't allow them into evidence without proper authentication. Robert was smiling again. He knew I couldn't prove what he'd done, not without legal help I couldn't afford. But I pressed on. Mr. Parker, isn't it true that you disappeared immediately after our company collapsed, leaving me to deal with all the creditors and legal issues? I relocated for business reasons. Business reasons? Or because you'd stolen $50,000 and didn't want to face the consequences? Objection. D.A. Williams was on his feet. Accusatory and not relevant to the current charges. Sustained. Mr. Washington, please limit your questions to relevant matters. I was getting frustrated again. Every time I tried to expose the truth about Robert, I was shut down by legal technicalities I didn't understand. Mr. Parker, why are you here today? How did you even know about this trial? I read about it in the newspaper. When I saw Samuel's name, I felt it was my civic duty to provide information about his character. You felt it was your civic duty? After 20 years of no contact? Yes. And it has nothing to do with the fact that Mrs. Hartwell's law firm handles real estate development, the same kind of work our construction company used to do. Robert's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Do you have any business relationship with Mrs. Hartwell or her law firm? No. But I could see he was lying. There was something there, some connection I couldn't quite grasp. When Robert stepped down, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Not only had I failed to expose his lies, but his testimony had made me look even more guilty. A man with a history of financial irregularities, according to his former business partner. The prosecution rested their case, and Judge Morrison called a brief recess before I would have to present my defense. I sat alone at the defendant's table, trying to figure out what to do next. I had character witnesses I could call, people who'd known me for years and could testify to my honesty. But after Robert's testimony, I wasn't sure it would matter. That's when I noticed a commotion near the back of the courtroom. A young woman in a business suit was talking urgently to someone on her phone. She kept looking in my direction, and something about her expression made me nervous. During the recess, she approached me. "Mr. Washington. My name is Lisa Park. I'm a paralegal with Morrison, Hartwell and Associates." My heart stopped. That was Mrs. Hartwell's law firm. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing me an envelope. "I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stand by and watch what's happening." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of what looked like a bank transfer record. The transfer was for $30,000, from Morrison, Hartwell and Associates to Elite Cleaning Services, dated 3 days after I'd been arrested. "What is this?" I asked. "Payment for services rendered," Lisa said quietly. "But Elite Cleaning Services doesn't actually provide cleaning services to our firm. We use independent contractors like you." I stared at the document, trying to understand what it meant. "Ms. Park, are you saying that Mrs. Hartwell's firm paid Elite Cleaning Services $30,000 for something other than cleaning?" "I'm not saying anything," she replied. "I'm just giving you a document that was accidentally included in a file I was copying. What you do with it is up to you." She walked away quickly, leaving me holding what might be the key to understanding what was really happening. $30,000. The exact value of the supposedly stolen watch. When court resumed, I called my first character witness, Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, an elderly woman whose office I'd been cleaning for 8 years. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how long have I been providing cleaning services for your business?" 8 years, Mr. Washington. You've been nothing but professional and trustworthy. Have you ever had any problems with missing items or theft? Never. In fact, you've returned things to me that I'd lost. Jewelry, cash, important documents. You're one of the most honest people I know. I called 3 more character witnesses, all with similar testimony. People who'd trusted me in their homes and businesses for years, who'd never had a single problem. But I could see it wasn't enough. Character witnesses were nice, but they didn't explain away the prosecution's evidence, flawed as it was. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. "Your Honor, I'd like to call one more witness. I'd like to call myself to testify." Judge Morrison looked surprised. "Mr. Washington, you have the right to remain silent. Are you sure you want to testify on your own behalf?" "Yes, Your Honor. I need to tell my story." I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. This was it. My last chance to convince the jury that I was innocent, that something bigger was happening here. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, "my name is Samuel Washington, and I did not steal Mrs. Hartwell's watch. I told them about my 15 years as a cleaner, about the trust my clients placed in me, about the pride I took in honest work. I told them about the night in question, about my routine, about the fact that I'd never even seen the watch Mrs. Hartwell claimed was stolen. But then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I told them about Robert Parker. 20 years ago, I learned a hard lesson about trust. My business partner, a man I considered my best friend, stole $50,000 from our company and left me to take the blame. I lost everything. My business, my home, my relationship with my sons. D.A. Williams objected, but Judge Morrison allowed me to continue. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. I know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you trust. I know what it feels like to lose everything because of someone else's greed. And I swore to myself that I would never, ever put another person through that kind of pain. I looked directly at Mrs. Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell, I understand why you think I took your husband's watch. I understand why it's easier to blame the cleaning man than to consider other possibilities. But I'm telling you, on my honor, on my children's lives, I did not take that watch. Then I pulled out the document Lisa Park had given me. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this document as evidence. D.A. Williams was on his feet immediately. Objection. This document hasn't been properly authenticated, and we haven't had a chance to examine it. Your Honor, I said, this document shows a payment of $30,000 from Mrs. Hartwell's law firm to Elite Cleaning Services, the same company whose representative lied under oath about my employment history. The payment was made 3 days after my arrest, and it's for the exact amount of the supposedly stolen watch. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Mr. Washington, where did you obtain this document? It was given to me by someone who works at Mrs. Hartwell's firm. Someone who couldn't stand by and watch an innocent man be framed. Mrs. Hartwell was whispering urgently to her attorney. D.A. Williams looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Your Honor, I continued, I believe this document proves that Mrs. Hartwell's firm paid Elite Cleaning Services to provide false testimony against me. I believe the theft charge is part of a larger conspiracy to discredit me because I overheard information about illegal activities at their firm. Objection. D.A. Williams was practically shouting. This is pure speculation and conspiracy theory. But Judge Morrison was studying the document carefully. Mr. Williams, I'm going to need an explanation for this payment. And I'm going to need it now. That's when Mrs. Hartwell stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to consult with my attorney. Denied. Mr. Williams, you have 5 minutes to explain this document or I'm declaring a mistrial. D.A. Williams looked panicked. He huddled with Mrs. Hartwell and her attorney, their whispered conversation growing more heated by the second. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell's attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw the charges against Mr. Washington. The courtroom exploded again. I felt like I was in a dream, like this couldn't really be happening. But Judge Morrison wasn't satisfied. Counselor, withdrawing charges doesn't explain this document. I'm ordering an investigation into potential perjury and conspiracy charges. That's when I realized I'd won more than just my freedom. I'd exposed something much bigger, something that could bring down powerful people who thought they were untouchable. But I'd also made enemies. Dangerous enemies who wouldn't forget what I'd done. As the courtroom cleared and people congratulated me on my victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That the real fight was yet to come. I was right. But I was also about to discover that I wouldn't have to fight it alone. Because at that moment, as I was gathering my papers and trying to process what had just happened, the courtroom doors opened one more time. And my entire world was about to change. The courtroom doors opened, and I looked up expecting to see a bailiff or maybe a reporter. Instead, I saw 2 men in expensive suits walking purposefully down the aisle. Something about them seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. They were both tall, well-built, carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that comes from success. The older one had my eyes. The younger one had my stubborn jawline. It took me a full 10 seconds to realize I was looking at my sons. Alan was 37 now, his hair starting to show gray at the temples. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. David was 34, broader than his brother, with the bearing of someone who'd served in the military. They stopped at the defendant's table where I was still sitting, too shocked to move. "Dad," Alan said quietly. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. 15 years of silence, 15 years of wondering if they were okay, if they were happy, if they ever thought about their old man. And here they were, standing in front of me like ghosts made real. "How did you?" I finally managed. "We've been following the case," David said. "When we saw your name in the legal filings, we knew we had to come." "But why? After all these years, why now?" Alan and David exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that brothers develop over a lifetime. "Because," Alan said, "we realized something watching this trial. We realized that the man who raised us, the man who taught us about integrity and standing up for what's right, would never steal anything. And if he was being framed, he was going to need help." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. "Boys, Dad," David interrupted gently, "we need to talk. But not here. There are too many years, and what we have to tell you is going to change everything." Judge Morrison had left the bench, but there were still people milling around the courtroom. Mrs. Hartwell and her attorney were huddled in the corner, speaking in urgent whispers. D.A. Williams was packing up his files with the look of a man whose career had just taken a serious hit. "Let's go somewhere private," Alan said. We walked out of the courthouse together, and I felt like I was in a dream. My sons, my boys, walking beside me after 15 years. They'd grown into successful men, and I'd missed all of it. Their graduations, their first jobs, their struggles and triumphs. We found a small diner a few blocks from the courthouse. It was the kind of place where nobody would pay attention to 3 black men having a serious conversation. Once we were seated in a back booth, Alan leaned forward. "Dad, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but you need to hear all of it before you react." I nodded, still trying to process the fact that my sons were sitting across from me. "David and I are both attorneys now. I'm a partner at Kellerman, Ross and Associates. David works for the federal prosecutor's office." "Federal prosecutor?" I asked. David nodded. "White-collar crime division. Dad, we've been investigating Morrison, Hartwell and Associates for the past 8 months." My mind reeled. Investigating them for what? Corruption, bribery, money laundering, fraud. They're involved in a massive scheme involving city contracts, low-income housing developments, and kickbacks to city officials. Alan pulled out a tablet and showed me a complex chart with names, dates, and dollar amounts. They've been winning city contracts through bribes, then using substandard materials and falsifying inspection reports. The money they save goes into offshore accounts, and they split the profits with corrupt city officials. I stared at the chart, trying to understand the scope of what they were showing me. "How much money are we talking about?" "Over the past 5 years. Approximately $50 million. I whistled low. "And you think they framed me because?" "Because you overheard something you shouldn't have," David said. "We've been trying to get inside information on their operation for months. When we heard about your case, we realized you might be the key we've been looking for." "What did you hear, Dad?" Alan asked. "Think back to the past few months. Any conversations, documents you might have seen, anything unusual." I thought back to that night 3 weeks ago, when I'd overheard Mrs. Hartwell on the phone. There was a phone call, I said slowly. Mrs. Hartwell was talking about a housing development project. She mentioned bribes, payoffs, falsified inspection reports. Alan and David exchanged another look. "Dad," David said, "we think they found out you overheard that conversation. The theft charge was designed to discredit you before you could become a problem." "But how would they know I heard anything? I never told anyone." "They have the building under surveillance," Alan explained. "Not official security cameras, but their own system. They've been paranoid about federal investigation for months." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So they've been watching me?" "Probably. And when they realized you might have heard something incriminating, they decided to neutralize the threat. By framing me for theft." "Exactly. A convicted felon's testimony wouldn't hold up in court. Even if you tried to report what you heard, no one would believe you." I sat back in the booth, trying to process everything they were telling me. "But the case is over. The charges were dropped. I'm free." David shook his head. "Dad, you exposed their operation today. That document you presented in court, the payment to Elite Cleaning Services. That's evidence of witness tampering and conspiracy. You've just made yourself a very dangerous enemy." "What do you mean?" Alan leaned forward. "These people have $50 million at stake. They've already shown they're willing to frame an innocent man to protect their operation. What do you think they'll do now that you've exposed them?" The reality of my situation started to sink in. I'd thought winning the case was the end of my problems. Instead, it might have been the beginning of much bigger ones. "So what do I do?" "You help us bring them down," David said. "Officially." "What?" Alan pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "Dad, we want you to work with us. As a federal informant." I stared at the card. It had David's name and title, David Washington, Assistant Federal Prosecutor. "You want me to spy on them?" "We want you to help us gather evidence," David corrected. "You have access to their offices, their conversations, their documents. You could be the inside source we need to build a case. But they'll be suspicious now. After what happened in court today, they'll never trust me again." "Actually," Alan said, "we think they might. Think about it from their perspective. You're a cleaning man who got lucky, who stumbled onto one piece of evidence and used it to save yourself. You're not a threat to their larger operation. Plus," David added, "they'll want to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't cause any more problems. The best way to do that is to keep you close." I thought about what they were proposing. Going back to work for the people who tried to destroy my life, pretending everything was normal while secretly gathering evidence against them. "It's dangerous," I said. "Yes," David admitted. "It is. But Dad, these people are stealing money meant for low-income housing. They're putting families at risk with substandard construction. They're corrupting the entire system. And," Alan added quietly, "it's a chance for us to work together. To be a family again." That hit me harder than anything else they'd said. The possibility of rebuilding my relationship with my sons, of being part of their lives again. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course. But Dad, we need to move quickly. Every day we wait is another day they have to cover their tracks or eliminate potential threats." The word eliminate sent another chill through me. "You think they'd actually hurt me?" David's expression was grim. "Dad, we're talking about $50 million and potential prison sentences for a lot of powerful people. Yes, I think they'd hurt you if they thought it was necessary." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over all of us. "There's something else," Alan said finally. "Something we haven't told you yet." "What?" "Robert Parker. Your old business partner. He's involved in this too." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "He's been working with Morrison, Hartwell and Associates for the past 5 years. He runs a construction company that gets a lot of their subcontracts. The same Robert Parker who stole $50,000 from me 20 years ago. The same one. Dad, we think his testimony today wasn't just about discrediting you for the theft charge. We think he was trying to make sure you couldn't be an effective witness against their larger operation." The pieces were starting to come together. Robert's surprise appearance, his lies about my character, his connection to Mrs. Hartwell's firm. "He's been planning this," I said slowly. 20 years ago, he destroyed my construction business. Now he's trying to destroy my credibility so I can't expose his new criminal enterprise." "That's what we think," David confirmed. I felt anger building in my chest, a rage I hadn't felt in years. Robert Parker had taken everything from me once. Now he was trying to do it again. What would I have to do? I asked. "If I agreed to help you." Alan pulled out a folder. "We'd wire you for sound. You'd go back to work, act like nothing happened. Listen to conversations, photograph documents when you can, report back to us regularly." "For how long?" "However long it takes to build a solid case. Could be weeks, could be months." I thought about the risks. These people had already shown they were willing to frame me for a crime I didn't commit. If they discovered I was working with federal prosecutors, there was no telling what they might do. But I also thought about justice. About the families who were being cheated out of safe housing. About the corruption that was poisoning the system. And I thought about my sons, sitting across from me, offering me a chance to be part of something important. A chance to make up for the years we'd lost. "If I do this," I said, "and something happens to me, promise me you'll finish it. Promise me you'll bring them all down." "Dad," Alan said, "nothing's going to happen to you. We'll be monitoring everything. The moment we think you're in danger, we pull you out. Promise me," I repeated. David reached across the table and took my hand. "I promise, Dad. We'll finish it." I looked at my sons, these successful men who'd grown up without me, who'd built their careers on the principles I'd tried to teach them before I lost everything. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." But even as I said the words, I had a feeling that I was walking into something much more dangerous than any of us realized. And I was right. Because what we didn't know was that Mrs. Hartwell and Robert Parker were already planning their next move. And this time, they weren't going to take any chances. This time, they were going to make sure I disappeared permanently. 3 days later, I was back at Morrison, Hartwell and Associates, pushing my cleaning cart down the familiar hallways like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just exposed their witness tampering scheme in open court. Like my life hadn't been turned upside down. The wire David had given me was smaller than I'd expected, barely the size of a button, hidden inside the collar of my work shirt. Alan had shown me how to activate it with a simple touch, how to make sure it was recording everything. "Just act normal, Dad," he'd said. "Do your job, keep your ears open, and don't take any unnecessary risks." But nothing about this felt normal. Every person I passed in the hallway could be an enemy. Every conversation could be my last. Mrs. Hartwell's assistant, Jennifer, greeted me at the reception desk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Washington, we're so glad you're back. Mrs. Hartwell would like to see you in her office when you have a moment." My blood ran cold. "Of course. I'll head there now." I knocked on Mrs. Hartwell's office door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she'd be able to hear it. "Come in, Samuel." She was sitting behind her massive mahogany desk, looking perfectly composed. Like she hadn't just tried to send me to prison for 5 years. "Please, sit down." I remained standing. "I prefer to stand, ma'am. I'm here to work." She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "Samuel, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding about my husband's watch. It turns out he'd simply misplaced it. Found it in his gym bag this morning." I touched my collar, making sure the wire was recording. "Misplaced it?" "Yes. You know how men can be with their belongings. I'm afraid I jumped to conclusions, and I'm truly sorry for the trouble it caused you." "The trouble it caused me?" "Mrs. Hartwell, you had me arrested. You put me on trial. You tried to destroy my reputation and send me to prison." Her smile never wavered. "And I've said I'm sorry. I hope we can put this unfortunate incident behind us and continue our professional relationship." I stared at her, trying to understand what game she was playing. "You want me to keep cleaning your offices?" "Of course. You do excellent work, Samuel. We'd hate to lose you over a simple misunderstanding." There was something in her tone, something that made my skin crawl. She was too calm, too friendly. This woman had orchestrated an elaborate frame job, and now she was acting like it was all a big mistake. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Hartwell. I'll get back to work then." "Wonderful. Oh, and Samuel, I've given you a raise. 20% increase, effective immediately. Consider it compensation for your troubles." "A raise?" She was giving me a raise after trying to destroy my life. "That's very generous. I believe in taking care of people who are loyal to us, Samuel. People who understand the value of discretion." There it was. The real message. Keep your mouth shut, and we'll take care of you. Cause problems, and, well, we've already shown you what we're capable of. I left her office feeling like I'd just had a conversation with a snake. But I'd gotten what David and Alan needed. A recorded admission that the watch had been misplaced, not stolen. Evidence that the entire case against me had been fabricated. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a routine. I'd arrive at the office building at 6 p.m., clean the common areas first, then work my way through the individual offices. And I listened. I listened to everything. I heard Mrs. Hartwell on the phone with city officials, discussing consulting fees and expedited approvals. I heard her husband talking about inspection reports that needed to be adjusted. I heard conversations about offshore accounts and shell companies. Every night, I'd meet with Alan and David at different locations around the city. Coffee shops, parks, parking garages. We'd review the recordings, plan the next day's surveillance, build our case piece by piece. "You're doing great, Dad," David would say. "This evidence is exactly what we need." But I could see the strain on both my sons' faces. They were worried about me, worried about the risks I was taking. And they were right to be worried. Because Mrs. Hartwell and her associates were getting suspicious. It started with small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Doors that were suddenly locked when they'd always been open before. People watching me more carefully, paying attention to where I went and what I was doing. Then, 3 weeks into my undercover work, everything changed. I was cleaning the conference room late one Thursday evening when I heard voices coming from Mrs. Hartwell's office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could make out multiple people inside. I moved closer, pretending to dust the hallway while straining to hear the conversation. "Can't let this continue," a man's voice was saying. I recognized it as Robert Parker. "The situation is under control," Mrs. Hartwell replied. "Samuel is back to work, keeping quiet, taking his money. He's not a problem. He's a huge problem." Robert's voice was getting louder. He exposed the elite cleaning services connection. He made us look like fools in court. And now he's walking around with evidence of our conversations. What evidence? He's a janitor, Robert. He cleans floors and empties trash cans. He's not stupid, Victoria. He figured out the connection between the payment to Elite and the theft charge. What else has he figured out? There was a pause, then another voice I didn't recognize. Robert's right. Washington is a liability. We should have handled this differently from the beginning. Handled it how? Mrs. Hartwell asked. Permanently. My blood turned to ice. They were talking about killing me. That's not necessary, Mrs. Hartwell said. We can manage him. Can we? Robert's voice was cold. Because I've been thinking about this, and I realize Samuel Washington has been a problem for me for 20 years. He was there when I had to restructure our construction business. He knows things about how I operate. And now he's in a position to cause real damage. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we solve the Samuel Washington problem once and for all. Make it look like an accident. A break-in gone wrong, maybe. Or a mugging in the wrong neighborhood. I felt sick. Robert wasn't just talking about protecting their current operation. He was talking about eliminating someone who'd been a threat to him for decades. Robert, the unknown voice said, you're talking about murder. I'm talking about protecting $50 million and keeping a dozen people out of federal prison. Samuel Washington is one man. One expendable man. He has sons, Mrs. Hartwell said quietly. So what? They haven't spoken to him in 15 years. They won't ask too many questions if something happens to him. I had to get out of there. I had to warn Alan and David. But as I started to back away from the door, I bumped into a cleaning cart I'd left in the hallway. The crash echoed through the empty building like a gunshot. The conversation in Mrs. Hartwell's office stopped immediately. What was that? Robert's voice. Probably just Samuel, finishing up his work, Mrs. Hartwell said, but I could hear the suspicion in her tone. I heard footsteps approaching the door. I had seconds to get away, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway was long and straight, with no hiding places. The office door opened, and Mrs. Hartwell stepped out. She looked directly at me, standing frozen next to the overturned cleaning cart. Samuel. Is everything all right? Yes, ma'am. Just clumsy. Knocked over my cart. She studied my face carefully, looking for any sign that I'd heard their conversation. How long have you been out here? Just got here. I was cleaning the conference room and came out to get more supplies. Robert appeared behind her, his eyes cold and calculating. Samuel, he said with false friendliness, good to see you again. Mr. Parker. You know, I've been thinking about our old partnership lately. All the good times we had. I remember things differently. His smile turned predatory. I'm sure you do. Memory can be such a tricky thing, can't it? Sometimes people remember things that never happened. Sometimes they forget things that did. The threat was clear. Remember our version of events, or suffer the consequences. I should get back to work, I said. Of course, Mrs. Hartwell said. Don't let us keep you. But as I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back. And I knew that everything had just changed. I finished my cleaning as quickly as possible and got out of the building. But instead of going home, I drove straight to the emergency meeting location Alan had given me. He was waiting in the parking garage, looking worried. "Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "They're planning to kill me." Alan went pale. "What?" I told him everything I'd heard, every word of the conversation between Mrs. Hartwell, Robert Parker, and the unknown third person. "We have to pull you out," Alan said immediately. "This is over." "No," I said. "We're too close. We have enough evidence to bring charges, but not enough to guarantee convictions. We need more." "Dad, they're talking about murdering you. This isn't worth your life." "Yes, it is. Alan, these people destroyed my life 20 years ago, and they just tried to do it again. They're stealing money from programs meant to help poor families. They're corrupting the entire system. We have to stop them." Alan was quiet for a long moment. "There might be another way," he said finally. "What do you mean? What if we let them think they succeeded?" I stared at him. "What? What if we fake your death? Make them think they got rid of their problem, while you're actually in protective custody, helping us build the final case?" It was a crazy idea. Disappear from my own life, let everyone think I was dead, while secretly working to bring down the people who tried to destroy me. How would that work? We stage an accident. Car crash, maybe, or a mugging gone wrong. Body never found, presumed dead. Meanwhile, you're in a safe house, reviewing evidence, preparing testimony. For how long? However long it takes. Could be weeks, could be months. I thought about what he was proposing. Giving up my life, my identity, everything I'd built over the past 15 years. Living in hiding while my enemies thought they'd won. But it would also give us the time we needed to build an airtight case. And it would keep me alive long enough to see justice done. What about you and David? If I'm supposedly dead, you can't have any contact with me. We'll figure it out. The important thing is keeping you safe and finishing this investigation." I looked at my son, this successful man who was willing to risk everything to protect me and bring criminals to justice. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." But even as I agreed to the plan, I had a terrible feeling that we were underestimating our enemies. That Robert Parker and Mrs. Hartwell were more dangerous and more resourceful than we realized. And I was right. Because what we didn't know was that they'd already figured out I was working with federal prosecutors. They'd been watching me, following me, recording my meetings with Alan and David. They knew exactly who my sons were, what they did for a living, and how much of a threat our family represented to their operation. And they were about to make a move that would change everything. The plan was supposed to be simple. Stage a car accident on a rainy night, make it look like I'd lost control and gone into the river. No body recovered, presumed dead. Clean and simple. But nothing about dealing with Robert Parker and Victoria Hartwell was ever simple. 2 days before we were supposed to fake my death, everything went wrong. I was at home, packing the few belongings I'd be allowed to take into protective custody, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Dad?" It was David's voice, but something was wrong. He sounded strained, frightened. "David? What's wrong?" "Dad, don't go home. Don't go to work. Don't go anywhere we've talked about meeting." "What are you talking about?" "I am home." "Then get out. Now." "They know, Dad. They know everything." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean they know everything?" "They've been watching us. recording our meetings. They know Alan and I are federal prosecutors. They know about the investigation. They know about the plan to fake your death. I was already moving, grabbing my jacket and keys. How is that possible? We don't know. But Dad, it's worse than that. They've made their move. I stopped at my front door. What move? Alan is missing. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Missing? What do you mean missing? He didn't come home last night. His car was found abandoned in a parking garage downtown. There are signs of a struggle. I felt like I was going to be sick. They took him. We think so. Dad, you need to get somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find you. What about you? Are you safe? For now. I'm at the federal building with a security detail. But Dad, they left a message. What kind of message? David's voice was barely a whisper. They want to trade. Alan for you. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 20 years of mistakes crushing down on me. First I'd lost my sons because of my failure to see Robert Parker's betrayal. Now I was going to lose one of them because of my decision to fight back. Where and when? Dad, no. We're not doing this. We'll find another way. David, they have your brother. There is no other way. Dad, if you turn yourself over to them, they'll kill both of you. You know that. He was right, but what choice did I have? Let them murder Alan to protect myself. What did the message say exactly? David was quiet for a moment. It was a text from Alan's phone. Your father has 24 hours to turn himself in at the old construction site on Riverside Drive. Come alone, no police, no FBI. If he doesn't show, or if we see any law enforcement, Alan dies. Riverside Drive. I knew that area. It was where Robert Parker's new construction company had been working on a low-income housing project. The same project that was part of their corruption scheme. Dad, we're going to get him back. But not by walking into a trap. How? You said they know about the investigation. They know you're federal prosecutors. What leverage do we have? We have evidence. Recordings, documents, financial records. Enough to bring down their entire operation. And they have Alan. David, evidence doesn't matter if your brother is dead. I could hear David struggling with the same impossible choice I was facing. Save Alan and lose the case, or pursue justice and lose his brother. There has to be another way, he said. But I was already making my decision. I'd failed my sons once before. I wasn't going to fail them again. David, I want you to promise me something. Dad, don't. Promise me that if something happens to me and Alan, you'll finish this. You'll bring them all down. Nothing's going to happen to either of you. Promise me. Dad. Promise me, son. There was a long pause. I promise. I hung up the phone and looked around my small apartment. 15 years of rebuilding my life, and it was all about to end. But maybe, if I was lucky, I could save my son in the process. I drove to Riverside Drive, taking a route that avoided main roads and traffic cameras. The construction site was in an industrial area, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings. The perfect place for someone to disappear. I parked a block away and walked to the site. It was after midnight, and the area was deserted except for the security lights illuminating the half-finished buildings. Robert Parker was waiting for me at the main gate, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. They looked like the kind of people who solved problems with violence. Samuel, Robert said with that same predatory smile. Right on time. Where's my son? Safe. For now. He gestured to one of his men, who opened the gate. Come on. Let's take a walk. I followed them into the construction site, my heart pounding. The skeletal frames of unfinished buildings loomed around us like the ribs of some massive beast. You know, Samuel, I've been thinking about our conversation 20 years ago. The last time we spoke, before you lost everything. I remember. Do you? Because I remember you threatening to expose me. To tell everyone what really happened with our company. You stole $50,000 and left me to take the blame. Robert laughed. I restructured a failing business to minimize losses. You were always too naive to understand how the real world works. We stopped in front of a partially completed building. Through the open framework, I could see a figure tied to a chair in what would eventually be the lobby. Alan. He was alive, but I could see blood on his face, and his expensive suit was torn and dirty. Let him go, Robert. You have me. That's what you wanted. Actually, Samuel, what I want is for you and your sons to disappear completely. You've caused me a lot of trouble over the years. My sons have nothing to do with this. Don't they? Alan Washington, partner at Kellerman, Ross and Associates. David Washington, assistant federal prosecutor. They've been investigating my business for months. Robert pulled out a tablet and showed me surveillance photos. Pictures of me meeting with Alan and David, pictures of them giving me the recording equipment, pictures of all of us together at the diner. You've been very busy, Samuel. Working with federal prosecutors to build a case against me and my associates. That's not very neighborly. You tried to frame me for theft. I tried to neutralize a threat. You should have taken the hint and disappeared quietly. Instead, you decided to fight back. That was a mistake. One of Robert's men stepped forward and grabbed my arms, zip-tying my hands behind my back. Here's what's going to happen, Robert continued. You and Alan are going to have a tragic accident. A gas leak explosion, maybe. Very sad. The grieving brother, David, will be too devastated to continue his investigation. Case closed. David will never stop. Even if you kill us, he'll keep fighting. Will he? Even after he receives evidence that his father and brother were involved in the very corruption scheme they were investigating. Even after he learns that you've been taking bribes for years, that Alan was helping you launder money through his law firm. Robert showed me another tablet, this one displaying forged bank records and fabricated documents. We've been preparing for this possibility for weeks, Samuel. By the time we're done, you and Alan will look like the criminals, and David will look like either a co-conspirator or a fool who was manipulated by his corrupt family. I felt despair washing over me. Even in death, Robert was going to destroy my sons' reputations and careers. You won't get away with this. I've been getting away with it for 20 years, Samuel. What makes you think that's going to change now? Robert's men pushed me toward the building where Alan was being held. As we got closer, I could see that my son was conscious, his eyes wide with fear and anger. Dad, he said when he saw me. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. It's not your fault, son. Robert laughed. How touching. A family reunion. That's when I heard it. The distant sound of sirens, getting closer. Robert heard it too. His expression changed from smug satisfaction to concern. What did you do? He demanded. Nothing. I came alone, just like you said. But the sirens were definitely getting closer. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. Robert pulled out his phone and made a call. What's your status? What do you mean they're gone? How many vehicles? Shit. He hung up and turned to his men. We need to move. Now. What about them? One of the men asked, gesturing to Alan and me. Kill them both. Make it quick. That's when the first FBI vehicle crashed through the construction site gate. The next few minutes were chaos. Gunfire, shouting, people running in all directions. Robert's men scattered, leaving Alan and me tied up in the middle of a firefight. I managed to work my way over to Alan and started trying to untie his restraints with my bound hands. Dad, how did the FBI know where to find us? I don't know, son. I don't know. But I was about to find out. Because as the gunfire died down and FBI agents secured the scene, I saw David walking toward us, flanked by federal agents. Dad. Alan. Are you okay? We're alive, I said. But how did you find us? David smiled grimly. We've been tracking Robert Parker for weeks. When Alan disappeared, we activated the GPS tracker in his phone. Led us right here. But Robert said they knew about the investigation. That they'd been watching us. They were. But they didn't know we were watching them too. As the FBI agents cut our restraints and checked us for injuries, David explained what had really been happening. Dad, we've been running a counter-surveillance operation for the past month. We knew they were suspicious, so we fed them false information while building our real case through other sources. What kind of false information? We let them think the investigation was smaller than it really is. That it was just about the Morrison, Hartwell firm. We didn't let them know we connected Robert's construction company to a dozen other corruption schemes across the city. Alan was rubbing his wrists where the zip ties had cut into them. So this was all a setup? Not exactly. We didn't plan for them to kidnap you. But when they did, it gave us the excuse we needed to move in with force. I looked around the construction site, now swarming with federal agents and crime scene technicians. Is it over? David's expression was grim. It's just beginning, Dad. What we've uncovered here is bigger than we ever imagined. This corruption scheme involves dozens of people, millions of dollars, and goes all the way to the mayor's office. What about Robert and Mrs. Hartwell? Robert's in custody. Mrs. Hartwell is being arrested as we speak, along with 6 city officials and a dozen other co-conspirators. I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. After 20 years, Robert Parker was finally going to face justice for what he'd done. But the cost had been enormous. Dad, Alan said quietly, I'm sorry we lost touch for so many years. I'm sorry we weren't there when you needed us. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. But even as I said it, I knew that our troubles weren't over. Robert Parker and Victoria Hartwell had powerful friends and expensive lawyers. The legal battle was just beginning. And I was about to learn that sometimes, winning the war is harder than winning the battle. 6 months later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse, waiting to testify in what the media had dubbed the biggest corruption trial in the city's history. 12 defendants, including Robert Parker and Victoria Hartwell, facing charges ranging from bribery and money laundering to conspiracy and attempted murder. But the case that should have been a slam dunk was falling apart. Dad, David said, sliding into the seat next to me in the hallway outside the courtroom, we need to talk. I could tell from his expression that it wasn't good news. What's wrong? Robert's lawyers have filed a motion to exclude your testimony. On what grounds? They're claiming you're an unreliable witness with a personal vendetta against their client. They're bringing up the failed business partnership from 20 years ago, arguing that your testimony is motivated by revenge rather than justice. I felt my stomach drop. Can they do that? The judge is considering it. But that's not the worst part. Alan appeared from around the corner, looking equally grim. Dad, they've made an offer. What kind of offer? David and Alan exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that told me I wasn't going to like what came next. They want to make a deal, Alan said. Robert pleads guilty to financial fraud, serves 2 years in minimum security prison, pays a fine, and agrees to cooperate in prosecuting the other defendants. What about the attempted murder charges? What about kidnapping you? Those charges would be dropped as part of the deal. I stared at my sons, trying to process what they were telling me. So Robert Parker, the man who destroyed my life 20 years ago, who tried to frame me for theft, who kidnapped my son and tried to have us both killed, gets 2 years in a country club prison. Dad, David said gently, it's not that simple. It sounds pretty simple to me. The system is protecting him again. The system is trying to get convictions against 12 people who stole $50 million from programs meant to help poor families, Alan corrected. Robert's testimony could guarantee those convictions. And without his testimony? David's expression was grim. Without his testimony, and if your testimony is excluded, we might not be able to convict anyone. They all walk free. I sat back in the hard courthouse chair, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on my shoulders. So I have to choose between getting justice for what Robert did to me and my family, or getting justice for all the families he and his co-conspirators cheated? That's about the size of it, Alan said. I thought about all the people who'd been hurt by this corruption scheme. Families who'd been promised safe, affordable housing and instead got substandard buildings that were falling apart. Children who were living in apartments with faulty wiring and contaminated water because Robert and his associates had cut corners to maximize their profits. What do you think I should do? Dad, David said, that's not our decision to make. This is about more than just our family. But whatever you decide, we'll support you. Before I could respond, a young woman approached us. She was maybe 25, carrying a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. Are you Mr. Washington? The man who exposed the housing corruption? Yes, I am. I wanted to thank you. My name is Maria Santos. My family lives in one of the buildings that was part of the corruption scheme. She shifted the baby to her other arm and continued. The walls in our apartment were full of mold because they used substandard materials. My baby was getting sick, respiratory problems, and the doctors couldn't figure out why. Then the news broke about the corruption, and inspectors came to our building. They found mold, lead paint, faulty wiring, all kinds of problems. I'm sorry you and your family went through that. The thing is, Mr. Washington, we're not the only ones. There are hundreds of families living in buildings that were supposed to be safe but aren't. And now, because of what you did, those buildings are being fixed. My baby is healthy again. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a petition signed by 847 families who live in buildings that were part of the corruption scheme. We wanted you to know that what you did mattered. That you saved lives. I took the petition with shaking hands. 847 families. 847 families who'd been living in dangerous conditions because Robert Parker and his associates had prioritized profit over safety. Thank you, I managed to say. After Maria left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about the choice I had to make. Dad? Alan said finally. I know what I have to do. I stood up and walked toward the prosecutor's office. David and Alan followed me. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this case. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park, the lead prosecutor on the corruption case. Mr. Washington, I understand you have concerns about the plea agreement we're considering with Mr. Parker. I do. But I also understand why you need his testimony. His cooperation could be the difference between convicting all 12 defendants or losing the case entirely. I get that. But I have a condition. What kind of condition? I want Robert Parker to publicly admit what he did to me 20 years ago. I want him to acknowledge that he stole $50,000 from our company and left me to take the blame. I want him to apologize for trying to frame me for theft and for kidnapping my son. Jennifer Park looked surprised. Mr. Washington, that's not typically part of plea agreements in federal cases. Then make it part of this one. You want my cooperation in accepting this deal? That's my price. And if Mr. Parker refuses? Then we go to trial, and I testify about everything he did to me and my family. Let the jury decide whether they want to believe a man who's spent 20 years destroying lives for profit. Jennifer Park was quiet for a moment, considering my proposal. I'll present your terms to Mr. Parker's attorneys. But I can't guarantee they'll accept. I understand. 2 hours later, I got my answer. Robert Parker had agreed to my terms. The next morning, I was back in the courthouse, but this time I was in the main courtroom, packed with reporters, victims' families, and curious observers. Robert Parker sat at the defendant's table, looking older and smaller than I remembered. 20 years of success and corruption had taken their toll. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he was a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. Judge Patricia Morrison, the same judge who'd presided over my theft trial, called the court to order. Mr. Parker, you've agreed to plead guilty to charges of conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering in exchange for your cooperation in the prosecution of your co-defendants. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that as part of this agreement, you're required to make a public statement acknowledging certain actions you took against Mr. Samuel Washington? Robert's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Robert nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Please proceed with your statement. Robert stood up slowly and turned to face me. For the first time in 20 years, we were looking directly at each other as equals. No, not equals. For the first time, I had the power. Samuel, he began, his voice barely audible, 20 years ago, I betrayed your trust and destroyed your life for my own financial gain. The courtroom was completely silent. I structured our business partnership to protect myself and leave you liable for all debts. When our company failed due to my poor decisions, I took $50,000 that belonged to both of us and disappeared, leaving you to face the creditors alone. I could see tears forming in his eyes, but I felt no sympathy for him. I destroyed your business, your reputation, and your relationship with your sons. I caused you to lose everything you'd worked for. He paused, struggling to continue. And 6 months ago, when you threatened to expose my current criminal activities, I orchestrated a scheme to frame you for theft. I paid witnesses to lie under oath. I tried to send an innocent man to prison to protect my own interests. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Judge Morrison called for order. When that failed, I kidnapped your son and threatened to kill both of you. I am responsible for 20 years of pain and suffering that you and your family have endured. Robert's voice broke completely. I am sorry, Samuel. I am deeply, truly sorry for everything I've done to you and your family. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from the system. And I hope that someday, somehow, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. He sat down, and the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. Judge Morrison looked at me. Mr. Washington, would you like to respond? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 20 years of anger and pain and loss. Your Honor, for 20 years I've carried the burden of Robert Parker's betrayal. I lost my business, my home, my relationship with my sons. I spent 15 years rebuilding my life from nothing, working as a janitor, living in a small apartment, wondering if I'd ever see my children again. I looked directly at Robert. 6 months ago, you tried to destroy me again. You tried to send me to prison for a crime I didn't commit. You kidnapped my son and threatened to kill us both. Robert was crying now, but I continued. But you know what, Robert? You failed. You failed because you underestimated the power of truth. You failed because you underestimated the strength of family bonds. And you failed because you forgot that sometimes, the people you try to destroy are stronger than you think. I paused, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. I don't forgive you, Robert. I may never forgive you. But I accept your apology, and I hope that your cooperation in this case will help bring justice to all the families you and your associates have hurt. I sat down, and Judge Morrison proceeded with the formal plea hearing. As I watched Robert Parker officially plead guilty and agree to cooperate in prosecuting his co-conspirators, I realized that I'd gotten something I never expected to get. Not revenge. Not even justice, exactly. But acknowledgement. Recognition. The truth, spoken publicly, for everyone to hear. And sometimes, that's enough. After the hearing, Alan and David walked with me out of the courthouse. How do you feel, Dad? David asked. Tired, I said honestly. But also, lighter, somehow. The other defendants will probably plead guilty now too, Alan said. Robert's testimony will make their cases impossible to defend. Good. Those families deserve justice. We stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the city where I'd lost everything and found it again. Dad, Alan said, what are you going to do now? I thought about that question. For the first time in 20 years, I had choices. Real choices. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to spend some time getting to know my sons again. We have a lot of catching up to do. David smiled. I'd like that. And then, I continued, I think I'm going to find a new line of work. I'm done cleaning up other people's messes. It's time to build something new. As we walked down the courthouse steps together, I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. But I also knew that the hardest part was still ahead of us. Rebuilding a family that had been broken for 15 years. Learning to trust each other again. Figuring out how to move forward together. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I believed it was possible. 1 year later, I was standing in front of a room full of reporters, city officials, and community leaders, about to make an announcement that would have seemed impossible just 18 months earlier. But first, let me tell you about the trial that changed everything. Robert Parker's cooperation had been devastating to his co-conspirators. Over the course of 6 months, all 11 remaining defendants had either pleaded guilty or been convicted at trial. Victoria Hartwell received 15 years in federal prison. The corrupt city officials lost their jobs and their freedom. The construction companies involved in the scheme were shut down permanently. But the real victory wasn't the convictions. It was what happened next. The federal government had seized $53 million in assets from the corruption scheme. Money that had been stolen from programs meant to help low-income families. Money that was supposed to build safe, affordable housing. And they needed someone to oversee the proper use of those recovered funds. Someone who understood construction. Someone who had experience with city contracts. Someone who had proven their integrity under the most difficult circumstances. Someone like me. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, looking out at the crowd gathered in the community center, my name is Samuel Washington, and I'm here to announce the launch of the Riverside Community Development Initiative. I gestured to the architectural plans displayed on easels around the room. Using funds recovered from the corruption prosecution, we're going to build 200 units of truly affordable housing. Housing that meets the highest safety standards. Housing that families can be proud to call home. The crowd erupted in applause, but I held up my hand for quiet. But this isn't just about building houses. It's about building a community. Every unit will include access to job training programs, childcare services, and educational support. We're not just giving people a place to live. We're giving them a foundation to build better lives. Maria Santos, the young mother I'd met at the courthouse, stood up in the front row. Mr. Washington, how do we know this won't be another broken promise? How do we know these buildings will actually be safe? It was a fair question. These families had been betrayed by the system before. Because, I said, I'm going to be living in one of these units myself. The room went silent. That's right. When the first building is completed, I'll be moving into apartment 1A. If it's not good enough for me and my family, it's not good enough for anyone. The applause this time was thunderous. After the presentation, I was surrounded by reporters asking questions about the project, about the corruption case, about my transformation from janitor to community developer. But the question that mattered most came from a young reporter in the back. Mr. Washington, what would you say to people who think the system is too corrupt to change? That one person can't make a difference. I thought about that question for a long moment. I'd say that 18 months ago, I was a 62-year-old janitor facing prison time for a crime I didn't commit. I had no money, no lawyer, no support system. I was completely alone. I paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching me. But I had something that my enemies didn't expect. I had the truth. And I had two sons who remembered the values I'd tried to teach them, even when I thought they'd forgotten me completely. I spotted Alan and David in the crowd, both smiling proudly. The system isn't perfect. There are corrupt people in positions of power. But there are also good people fighting for justice. And sometimes, if you're willing to stand up and tell the truth, even when it's dangerous, even when it seems hopeless, you can make a difference. After the press conference, the three of us went to dinner at a small restaurant near the construction site. It had become our weekly tradition, these dinners together. A chance to catch up, to share stories, to slowly rebuild the relationship we'd lost. Dad, Alan said, cutting into his steak, I have some news. Good news or bad news? Good news. Great news, actually. Sarah and I are getting married. I nearly choked on my water. Sarah? When did you start dating someone named Sarah? Alan laughed. About 6 months ago. I wanted to make sure it was serious before I introduced her to the family. And it's serious? Serious enough that I want you to walk her down the aisle. I stared at my son, not understanding. Walk her down the aisle? Alan, that's usually the father's job. Her father died when she was 12. She doesn't have anyone else. And she specifically asked if you would do it. I felt tears forming in my eyes. She wants me to walk her down the aisle. She doesn't even know me. She knows enough. She knows you're the man who raised 2 sons who turned out okay despite everything. She knows you're the man who risked his life to fight corruption and help families. She knows you're the man who chose justice over revenge. David cleared his throat. Actually, Dad, I have some news too. Please tell me you're not getting married too. I don't think my heart can handle 2 weddings. David laughed. No, not getting married. But I am getting a promotion. The Attorney General has asked me to head up a new task force on municipal corruption. We're going to be investigating similar schemes in cities across the country. That's incredible, son. I'm so proud of you. The thing is, Dad, we want you to be part of it. Part of what? The task force. As a consultant, you have a unique perspective on how these corruption schemes work, how they affect communities, how to build cases that actually result in meaningful change. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what my sons were telling me. You want me to work for the federal government? We want you to help us fight corruption wherever we find it. Use your experience to help other families who are being cheated by the system. I don't know anything about being a federal consultant. Dad, Alan said, 18 months ago you didn't know anything about being an undercover informant either. But you figured it out. That night, I walked through the construction site where the first Riverside Community Development building was taking shape. The foundation was poured, the frame was going up, and for the first time in 20 years, I was building something instead of just cleaning up after other people. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mr. Washington. This is Judge Patricia Morrison. I was surprised to hear from the judge who presided over both my theft trial and Robert Parker's plea hearing. Your Honor, what can I do for you? Actually, Mr. Washington, I was calling to see what I could do for you. I don't understand. I've been following your work with the Community Development Project. It's impressive. But I think you could have an even bigger impact. How so? Have you ever considered law school, Mr. Washington? I laughed. Your Honor, I'm 63 years old. I think I'm a little past the age for law school. Age is just a number. And you have something most law students don't have. Real-world experience with how the system works and how it fails. You understand justice in a way that can't be taught in a classroom. Judge Morrison, I appreciate the suggestion, but... Mr. Washington, I sit on the board of directors for Chicago Metropolitan Law School. We have a program for non-traditional students, people who want to use their life experience to make a difference in the legal system. I think you'd be perfect for it. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of the construction site, looking up at the skeletal frame of the building that would soon house families who deserved better than what the system had given them. Law school. At 63. It seemed crazy. But then again, 18 months ago, the idea of becoming a federal informant and bringing down a $50 million corruption scheme had seemed crazy too. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Dad, just saw the news about Judge Morrison's call. Alan and I think you should do it. The world needs more lawyers who actually understand justice. Another text, this one from Alan. Plus, if you become a lawyer, you can finally understand what David and I do for a living. I smiled, looking around at the construction site that represented so much more than just buildings. It represented hope, second chances, the possibility that broken things could be rebuilt stronger than before. 6 months later, I was sitting in my first law school class, surrounded by students young enough to be my grandchildren. The professor was discussing constitutional law, the principles of due process and equal protection under the law. Mr. Washington, she said, calling on me, what do you think the founders meant when they wrote about equal justice under law? I thought about my journey from a broken man standing alone in a courtroom to someone who was building homes and fighting corruption and preparing to become a lawyer at 63. I think, I said, they meant that justice isn't something that just happens. It's something you have to fight for. Every day. And sometimes, the people who fight hardest for justice are the ones who've been denied it the longest. The professor smiled. Excellent answer, Mr. Washington. After class, I walked across campus to meet Alan and David for lunch. They were both busy with their own cases now, but we still made time for our weekly dinners and occasional lunches. How's law school treating you, Dad? Alan asked. It's hard. Harder than I expected. But good hard, you know. Like building something worthwhile. Any regrets? David asked. I thought about that question. Regrets about the 20 years I'd lost. About the relationship with my sons that had been broken for so long. About the pain and struggle and injustice I'd endured. No, I said finally. No regrets. Everything that happened, all the pain and loss and struggle, it led me here. It led me back to you too. It led me to a place where I can actually make a difference. Dad, Alan said, there's something we've been wanting to tell you. What's that? We're proud of you. Not just for what you've accomplished in the past year, but for who you've always been. For the values you taught us, even when we were too young and angry to appreciate them. David nodded. You never gave up. Even when you lost everything, even when we abandoned you, you never stopped being the man who raised us to believe in justice and integrity and doing the right thing. I felt tears forming in my eyes again. It seemed like I cried a lot these days, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude and joy and hope. You boys didn't abandon me, I said. You just needed time to find your own way. And look how you turned out. I couldn't be prouder. As we sat there in the campus cafeteria, 3 generations of Washington men who'd found their way back to each other, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not revenge against the people who'd wronged me. Not even justice in the traditional sense. But redemption. Restoration. The chance to build something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. And the knowledge that sometimes, if you're willing to stand up and tell the truth, even when it seems impossible, even when you're standing alone against powerful enemies, you can change the world. One family at a time. One building at a time. One case at a time. One truth at a time. 3 years later, I was standing in a courtroom again. But this time, I wasn't the defendant. I wasn't even a witness. I was the lawyer. Your Honor, I said, addressing Judge Patricia Morrison, who had become something of a mentor over the years, my client, Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, is a 70-year-old grandmother who was evicted from her apartment because she complained about unsafe living conditions. I gestured to the elderly woman sitting at the plaintiff's table, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes filled with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a lifetime of struggle. The defendant, Riverside Property Management, claims she was evicted for non-payment of rent. But the evidence shows she was evicted in retaliation for reporting code violations, mold contamination, and faulty electrical wiring that posed a danger to all the tenants in the building. It had taken me 4 years to get through law school, studying nights and weekends while continuing to oversee the community development project. 4 years of constitutional law and civil procedure and evidence rules. 4 years of learning to think like a lawyer while never forgetting what it felt like to be powerless in the system. Now, at 67, I was a practicing attorney specializing in housing law and civil rights. My first case as a licensed lawyer was representing tenants against slumlords, fighting the same kind of corruption and exploitation I'd experienced myself. Mrs. Rodriguez has lived in that apartment for 15 years, I continued. She raised her grandchildren there after their parents died in a car accident. She's never missed a rent payment, never caused any problems. Her only crime was caring enough about her neighbor's safety to report dangerous conditions. The defense attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who reminded me of the prosecutors who tried to railroad me years ago, stood up to object. Your Honor, Mr. Washington is making emotional arguments rather than legal ones. The fact remains that Mrs. Rodriguez violated her lease agreement by making unauthorized complaints to city inspectors. Unauthorized complaints. I turned to face the defense attorney. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that tenants don't have the right to report safety violations? I'm arguing that tenants have an obligation to follow proper procedures. The proper procedure for reporting a gas leak is to call the fire department immediately, not to file a formal complaint with the landlord and wait for a response. Mrs. Rodriguez potentially saved lives by reporting those violations. Judge Morrison nodded. Mr. Washington is correct. Tenants have both the right and the responsibility to report safety hazards. Continue with your argument, Mr. Washington. I spent the next hour laying out the case, presenting evidence of the unsafe conditions, the pattern of retaliation against complaining tenants, and the deliberate negligence of Riverside Property Management. When I finished, Judge Morrison didn't even need to deliberate. I find in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Rodriguez is awarded damages for wrongful eviction, moving expenses, and emotional distress. Additionally, I'm ordering Riverside Property Management to bring all units in the building up to code within 60 days or face closure. Mrs. Rodriguez started crying, and I felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with winning a case for someone who truly deserved justice. After court, Mrs. Rodriguez hugged me tightly. Mr. Washington, thank you. Thank you for believing me when no one else would. Mrs. Rodriguez, you didn't need me to believe you. You needed someone to listen. That's what lawyers are supposed to do. As I walked out of the courthouse, I saw a familiar figure waiting by the steps. Robert Parker, looking older and grayer than when I'd last seen him at his sentencing hearing 3 years ago. He'd served 18 months in federal prison, lost his construction company, and been banned from doing business with any government entity. The last I'd heard, he was working as a project manager for a small residential contractor. Samuel, he said as I approached. Robert. We stood there for a moment, two old men who'd been through hell together, not sure what to say. I heard about your law practice, he said finally. Helping tenants fight slumlords. It's good work. It's necessary work. I wanted to apologize again. I know I said it in court, but I wanted to say it privately. What I did to you, 20 years ago and 3 years ago, it was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all I saw was a tired man carrying the weight of his mistakes. I appreciate that, Robert. I also wanted you to know that I've been following your community development project. The families living in those buildings, they're lucky to have someone like you looking out for them. They deserve better than what the system gave them before. Robert nodded. Samuel, I know I have no right to ask this, but I was wondering if there might be a place for me in what you're doing. I know construction, I know the business, and I want to make amends for what I've done. I was quiet for a long moment, considering his request. Robert, I appreciate that you want to make amends. But trust is something that has to be earned over time. And honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to trust you again. I understand. But, I continued, if you're serious about making amends, there are other ways to do it. Volunteer with housing advocacy groups. Use your construction knowledge to help families understand their rights. Find ways to give back to the communities you helped damage. I will. I promise I will. As Robert walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of peace. The anger and resentment I'd carried for 20 years had finally burned itself out, replaced by something more productive. My phone buzzed with a text from Alan. Dad, turn on Channel 7 News. You're going to want to see this. I found a coffee shop with a TV and asked them to change the channel. The news anchor was standing in front of a familiar building. This is the site of the former Morrison, Hartwell and Associates law firm, which was at the center of a massive corruption scandal 3 years ago. Today, the building is being converted into a legal aid clinic that will provide free legal services to low-income families. The camera panned to show a sign being installed over the entrance, the Samuel Washington Legal Aid Clinic. I nearly dropped my coffee. The news anchor continued, "The clinic is being funded by a coalition of civil rights organizations and is named after Samuel Washington, the former janitor whose courage in exposing the corruption scheme led to the recovery of over $50 million in stolen funds." My phone rang. It was David. "Dad, did you see the news?" "I'm watching it now." "Did you know about this? Alan and I may have had something to do with organizing the funding. We thought it was time your name was on something positive instead of just court documents." I felt tears forming in my eyes again. "Boys, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Dad. You've already said everything that needed to be said. With your actions, with your courage, with the way you've rebuilt your life and helped other people rebuild theirs." That evening, I was at home in my apartment in the First Riverside Community Development Building, grading papers from the paralegal training program I had started teaching at the local community college, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Alan, David, and a young woman I didn't recognize. "Dad," Alan said, "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Sarah." Sarah was a petite woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She stepped forward and hugged me like we'd known each other for years. "Mr. Washington, I've heard so much about you. Alan talks about you constantly. All good things, I hope. The best things. He told me about how you taught him and David to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. How you never gave up, even when everything seemed hopeless. I made a lot of mistakes along the way." "We all do," Sarah said. "But Alan told me something else. He said you taught him that it's not the mistakes that define us, it's how we respond to them. How we learn from them and use them to become better people." David stepped forward. "Dad, we have something to ask you." "What's that?" "We want you to officiate our wedding." I stared at my sons, not understanding. "Officiate? I'm not a minister." "You can get ordained online," Alan explained. "It takes about 5 minutes. Dad, you've been the most important influence in our lives. We can't imagine anyone else marrying us. Both of you. You're both getting married." David grinned. "I may have forgotten to mention that I'm engaged too. Her name is Lisa, and she's a public defender. You'll love her." I sat down heavily in my chair, overwhelmed by the rapid-fire announcements. "So let me get this straight. You want me to officiate both of your weddings?" "A double wedding," Sarah said. "We thought it would be perfect. The whole family together, celebrating new beginnings." "Dad," Alan said, "you've spent the last few years helping other people rebuild their lives. Now it's time to celebrate rebuilding our own family." 6 months later, I was standing in the community center next to the Riverside Development Project, wearing a rented tuxedo and holding a book of wedding vows I'd written myself. In front of me stood my 2 sons and their brides, surrounded by friends, family, and members of the community we'd all worked to build together. "Dearly beloved," I began, "we are gathered here today not just to celebrate the union of 2 couples, but to celebrate the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances." I looked out at the crowd, seeing faces I recognized from the housing project, from the legal aid clinic, from the courtrooms where we'd fought for justice together. Alan and Sarah, David and Lisa, your love stories began in different ways, but they share something important. They're built on the foundation of shared values, mutual respect, and a commitment to making the world a better place. As I continued with the ceremony, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. The betrayal and loss, the years of separation, the fight for justice, and the slow process of rebuilding trust and love. Marriage, I said, like justice, like family, like community, is something you have to work for every day. It's not enough to say you love someone. You have to show it through your actions, your choices, your willingness to stand by each other when times get tough. When it came time for the rings, I paused and looked directly at my sons. Alan and David, when you were children, I tried to teach you about integrity, about standing up for what's right, about never giving up on the people you love. I failed you in many ways, but somehow, you learned those lessons anyway. You became the men I always hoped you'd become, and I couldn't be prouder to call you my sons. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including mine. After the ceremony, during the reception, I was approached by a young reporter from the local newspaper. "Mr. Washington, can I ask you a few questions about your journey from janitor to lawyer to community leader?" "Of course. What would you say to someone who's facing what seems like an impossible situation? Someone who feels like the system is stacked against them?" I thought about that question, the same question I've been asked many times over the past few years. I'd say that change is possible, but it's not easy. It requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to stand up for what's right even when you're standing alone. But most importantly, it requires hope. Hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope that broken things can be fixed. Hope that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible. And if someone doesn't have hope, then they need to find people who do. Family, friends, community members who believe in them and will stand with them. Because nobody fights alone and wins. We all need each other. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, I found myself standing outside the community center, looking up at the apartment buildings we'd built together. Lights were on in dozens of windows, families settling in for the night in homes that were safe, affordable, and built with integrity. Alan and David approached, still in their wedding attire but with their ties loosened and their jackets off. "Dad," Alan said, "thank you for today. For everything. Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of your lives again." "Dad," David said, "we have one more surprise for you." "I don't think I can handle any more surprises today." David handed me an envelope. "Open it." Inside was a letter from the Chicago Bar Association. "Dear Mr. Washington," I read aloud, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive this year's Pro Bono Service Award for your outstanding work representing low-income tenants and your contributions to housing justice in our community." I looked up at my sons, speechless. "The ceremony is next month," Alan said. "And we'll be there to watch you receive it." As I stood there holding the letter, surrounded by my sons and the community we'd built together, I realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not erasing the past, but transforming it into something meaningful. Not forgetting the pain, but using it to help others avoid the same suffering. Not seeking revenge against those who'd wronged me, but building something better in spite of them. "You know," I said to Alan and David, when I was standing in that courtroom 4 years ago, facing prison time for a crime I didn't commit, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. "And now?" David asked. "Now I realize I hadn't lost everything. I just lost my way. And sometimes, losing your way is the first step to finding where you really belong." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, 3 generations of Washington men who'd found their way back to each other and forward to something better. "So what's next, Dad?" Alan asked. I smiled, looking out at the lights of the city where I'd been broken and rebuilt, where I'd lost everything and found it again. "Next, we keep building. Keep fighting. Keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today." "Together?" David asked. "Together." And as we walked back toward the community center to help clean up after the reception, I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. Complete and total peace. Not because the world was perfect, or because all injustices had been corrected, or because everyone who'd wronged me had been punished. But because I'd learned that the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge. It's redemption. And the most powerful form of victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's becoming the person you were meant to be, despite everything they did to stop you. Hey everyone, thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that family bonds can survive anything, please hit that like button. If you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, even when it seems impossible, please subscribe for more stories like this one. And if you've ever felt alone in your darkest hour, if you've ever wondered whether justice is possible in an unfair world, please share this story. Because sometimes, the most important thing we can do is remind each other that hope is real, that change is possible, and that no one has to fight alone. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. No matter what you've been through, no matter how broken things seem, there's always a chance to rebuild, to redemption, and to find your way home. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.